today's session is about JS and ETS basic introduction, along with some introduction about basic components in each. Okay, so mainly we will be discussing about both the development paradigms which ArchUI is providing, which are JavaScript and TypeScript. And going forward, we will discuss more about JavaScript introduction and the components used within it. Similar fashion, we will have some introduction on TypeScript and the basic components which are used in TypeScript. And we will go through some sample codes for more understanding, followed by some references which can help you to understand further more about these topics. Okay, to have a small recap, which was done in the previous training session. I think in previous session, we already discussed about ArchUI development framework. So basically, just to have a recap, Huawei's ArchUI is a UI development framework that provides what developers need, mainly to develop the HarmonyOS application user interfaces. Okay, so as I already told, the ArchUI comes up with two development paradigms. One is a JavaScript-based web-like development paradigm, and the second one is TypeScript-based declarative development paradigm. So let's go in detail about these two frameworks. Coming to JavaScript-based development paradigm, it's more or less like our web development framework, which includes HTML, JS, but in our HMOS SDK, it involves HML, CSS, and JavaScript files. Mainly, HML stands for HarmonyOS markup language, and this is what is used for building layouts. CSS is used for defining styles, and JavaScript, as all of us know, is used for adding processing logic into our application. So this is brief about the first one. Coming to the second one, which is declarative development paradigm. This uses basically the TypeScript programming language, and it actually extends declarative UI syntax. So it provides many UI drawing capabilities along with animations and state management. So basically, if you are developing small or medium-sized applications, it's preferred to use the HML, CSS, JS format development framework. And if you are going with some complex application development, it's preferable to use the TypeScript-based programming. Okay, clear, right? So now let's in detail check about the JavaScript-based development framework. So basically, all these frameworks allows you to develop cross-device applications and with very high performance. So let's, in brief, go through the overall structure of this. So basically, if you see in this picture, these are the layers in the JavaScript-based web-like development paradigm. So the top layer is the application layer, followed by framework, engine, and porting layer. The application layer contains applications, all the applications which we are developing with feature abilities. Coming to framework layer, this is the layer where UI parsing and all happens, and also provides MVVM architecture, page routing, etc. Coming to the engine layer, it actually accomplishes animation parsing, DOM building, layout computings, and all. And the porting layer is what provides abstraction to actually called the platform APIs. So this is the high level layers in this development paradigm. Just you can remember and have a glance about it. Let's move on to the file organization. Okay, if you see here, for the JavaScript development part, this is how the files are organized. So you can open Deveco Studio, your IDE basically, and try out one sample application and check and understand which all files are available and all. So basically these are the files available. The first one is app.js followed by pages, and there will be one common folder which is an optional one, resource folder, and I18N folder. So the first screenshot which you are seeing here, this is the basic directory structure, and the second directory structure is just to visualize the resource sharing part. So basically here if you see, this is the default folder, but if you want to create multiple instances of your application, you can create multiple default folders, and there will be one share folder which will be accessible commonly by all the default folders. Basically all the default folders in the sense all the application instances. Each default folder will be your one application instance. Okay, and let's see all these files in brief. So first thing, if you see inside the pages folder and inside the index, you can see 3 files whose extensions are HML, CSS, and JS. As we already discussed, HML describes the page layout, CSS describes the page style, and JS anyway describes the interaction processes between pages. And your actual processing logic lies in your JS. So functions of other folders, let's understand. First, coming to app.js. This is the file which manages global JavaScript logics and the application lifecycle. Later during the demo, I'll just show you what are the contents in this file. But as of now, just remember that this is at application layer, wherein it actually holds all the data which is required for this particular application. And as we already saw, the pages directly stores all the components. So in this particular example, the index is one component. Like that, you can add multiple components. And the common directory stores public resource files such as media, custom components, along with some JS files, which you can commonly use in your components. And coming to I18N, that is used to configure resources in different languages. Mainly, we add UI strings over here, which needs to be maintained in different languages. And the share folder already we discussed is used. It will be a common folder across multiple default instances. Okay, so so application resources also can be accessed either via absolute path or via relative path. For example, if you are in index.js and you want to refer to detail.js, so you can actually call it via relative path. Go to dot and then /detail/detail.js. So in that way, you can access the other components or resources from one file to another. So this part is clear, right? Okay, now let's understand more about the JS tag within your config.json file. Okay, before that, let me show you the structure over here. So this is one sample code, and I have showed you in the previous slide. This will be the actual structure of your application. So once you create a JS application, there will be one entry folder created, which will be the main entry module. And you will have source, main, JS folder, wherein all your components and resources will be maintained. And as I said, the default folder will be created by default. And inside that, you will have app.js, pages, common, and i18n. And within your main folder, you will have config.json, and wherein all the configurations details will be placed, like what is the bundle name, etc., device types. Along with that, there will be one JS tag, which is used to define your JS components and other details. So this is what we are checking now in the current slide. Okay, so as we just saw, the JS tag contains three things: instance name, window style, and page root information. Right, so whatever pages are created in this particular pages folder, those needs to be declared over here. So that is the root information. Basically, we will be declaring in the pages attribute. Along with that, you will be giving name and window details. Name will be the JavaScript instance name, and the window will hold the window information. Okay. Okay. So this part is clear, right? So basically, your JS tag needs to be defined and updated whenever you are adding a new page into your application. Okay, let's learn about app.js also. As I said before, you can customize the lifecycle implementation logic on an application-to-application basis in the app.js file. So if you see here, the screen, there is a sample app.js code wherein the lifecycle callbacks are placed, which are on create and on destroy, and some data which you want to maintain at application level. So that data you can maintain here. And if you want to access this data from other pages, there is an inbuilt function available called getApp. So using the getApp, you can obtain the data details of this application. So suppose if you want to access the test attribute in other pages, then you can just do getApp.test. Will give you this data. Okay, so now we understood about JS tag and app.js file. Let's move on to other files. Let's have a brief introduction about this HML, CSS, and JS files which are used in this particular application. As I already said, HML is a HTML-like language which allows to build pages which are based on components and events. So if you see this particular example, this is one HTML file which defines the UI basically, and which uses components to describe your UI, and which can have some events also on which user can have some interactions, like on click. Okay, so you can go through this point. Events are bound to components through on or at. So to bind events to your components, you can use there are some predefined functions which you can use, which starts with on or at. For example, if you see this HTML file, there's one text box which prints some count, and there are 5 input boxes, and there are some events added to these boxes. There are 5 buttons to which events are added. So when you click on this first button, on click of it, the increase function will be called, whose implementation you can find in the respective JS file. So basically, if you see this JS file, you have a data. The data have only one attribute called count, whose value is 0. So whenever you click this button, the count value is updated. That's the simple functionality of this particular UI element. Okay, so people who have hands-on on HTML, it will be easy because it's more or less similar to that. So there are some more functions which are available, like loop rendering, conditional rendering, template references. We can just have a glance on these samples. Loop rendering, in the sense you have an array and you want to display the elements within that array. So you can use the concept of loop rendering, wherein you, in the for key, you can give the array value. Then your framework will actually loop through it and display the items within that array. So these are different ways in which you can loop through arrays. You can give a name to an array. If you don't give any name, you can directly access it using $item. Otherwise, if you're giving a name, you can access it via that name, or to both index and value within the array, you can provide names and use those to access the elements, items within that array. Okay, going to conditional rendering. The syntax will be like this. You have to use if else, elif else. So visible is one attribute which holds Boolean value. So you can use this syntax to do conditional rendering. So other way is through template references, wherein you can define a template and use that template in your actual HTML files. So suppose here I am defining one template which have 2 components, 2 UI elements basically, and I can include this template here like this, using an element tag, give a name to this particular template and the path to that template. So using this name, now I can access this particular template and include it in this index.html. So basically in this template, I am defining name, value and age. So because of this code, 2 text boxes will be printed with these values, 20 and 18. Okay. Okay, let's move to CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. This is used to describe HTML page structures. So basically, whatever components which framework is already providing, those will have some default styles, and you can even change the default style values which framework have already placed. So if you see one of this example for more understanding, in your HTML file, for the class, you are giving container value, for which the framework will start looking into index.js for the container details, and these are the styles which will be which will be given to this component container. So it's a simple example of CSS file. Okay, and this is one example for internal styling. And you may have some cases wherein you need to import some external CSS files also. So in such cases, you can use @import and import that external CSS file and include it in your HML file. Okay, and we also have some selectors which can be used. A CSS selector is actually used to select elements for which styles needs to be added to. Okay, so in this example, we are using the dot class selector, which means it selects all the components whose class is container. Say, for example, I have some 3-4 elements defined in this particular HTML file whose class is set to container. So then this styling will be applicable to all of those elements. Similar to that, we have some other selectors like ID tag, ID followed by class. So basically wherever ID is defined as this, for example, title ID, so all those components will be selected and styling will be applied to all of those components. Okay, let's move on to JavaScript. So basically, as we already discussed, the JS files is used to define the application's processing logic. And the JS UI framework supports the JavaScript language, which conforms to ECMA script specifications. Okay. So basically, as we have seen in the previous examples, so the JavaScript file looks like this, wherein you can have the syntax will be mostly similar to the actual JavaScript. And you can have functions, classes, objects, everything over here. Okay, so there are some inbuilt attributes which are provided by our SDK, which we can use to get some details. Like, for example, $def is used to get the application level, that app.js object. And using $s, we can be able to access the data which is defined in app.js. Previous slides, I think we have read, right? Get app also we can use. Instead of that, we can even use $def. Like this, we can access in other places. This $app.$def dot the other data which is defined in app.js. Okay, like that, there are some more data functions also which are provided, like $set, $delete, like this. The syntax will be of key value setting and getting, which can be used to set or update some data which is defined in your application. Or if you want to delete any attribute which is defined in your application, you can use $delete, pass the key value, that attribute will be deleted. Like that, there are few of different kinds of functions which helps us to parse through and operate on the data easily within the JS files. There are some of public functions which are also provided, like the ones which are listed here. The first one is $element. This obtains the component with a specific ID. For example, in your HTML, you define some component with ID equals to something, ID equals to text1, so that you can access via $element. If you can see a sample code here, here the div tag's ID is given to some XXS that can be accessed via this $element of XXX. Like that, if you want to access some more elements like root element, you can use $root element, root view models root, the parent component of this particular view, the child component of this view. So you can use these functions and get access to those particular DOM elements. Okay, there are a few event functions also which are provided like $watch. These listens for attribute changes. Like for example, any value of any data attribute changes, then the callback bound to that data will be triggered. So for that purpose, you can use $watch. And few page level functions also like scroll to. So this will scroll the page to the target position. So you can specify the target position in different ways. Like the exact position you wishes to scroll, that can be provided, or the ID of any particular element to which the scroll has to happen, that can be given, or how much duration the scroll has to happen, and in the animations that how much time this has to happen. Like that, different ways are provided by the framework. And this is a callback, the last one, wherein once the scroll completes, if you want to do some operation, you can use this callback. Okay, so this is all about HML, CSS, and JS basics. Now let's go through and understand the life cycle of both application and page. Okay, so coming to application life cycle, we already saw in app.js, right? So already two callbacks. Application lifecycle functions we have seen, which are onCreate, onDestroy, and there are two more called onShow and onHide. So onCreate will be triggered whenever the application is created, and obviously onDestroy whenever the application exits. So when application starts running in background, that time onShow function will be called, and when application moves to background, onHide function will be called. So these are the application lifecycle functions. Similar way, every page will have a life cycle. So if you see here in the inner box, the blue box, so these are all the application lifecycle functions. So the major functions we can see. The first one is onInit. This is called when page initialization is complete. And this function will be called only once in the page lifecycle, and followed by onReady. Once the page is created, this function will be called. Followed by onActive. So as name says, when the page is activated, this is the function which is called. Followed by onShow is when the page is displayed completely. So onInit ready active show is the function flow until the page initialization till the page is completely visible. And then the reverse operations. The page is suspended, so on inactive will be called, followed by the page is completely invisible, on hide, followed by the page is destroyed, when on destroy will be called. So this is the page life cycle. Hope this is clear. And there are some more life cycle functions of page which are not covered over here, like on back press, whenever back is pressed. And there are some more like on new request, whenever the ability is started and already, and a new request is received to the same page. Like that, there are a few more functions which you can go through later. But these are the main functions, and understanding this should be enough. Okay, let's move on. Okay. Let's move on to the resource structure and naming conventions in JavaScript programming. Okay, so basically the resources are defined in this format: resource hyphen followed by the basically the characteristics. Generally, if nothing is given, the default resource hyphen default.json will be referred. Otherwise, based on the priorities defined by SDK, the respective files will be taken. Like for example, MCC MNC will have the highest priority. So resource hyphen MCC MNC if you are providing, and if that particular SIM is inserted in the device, so then that particular resource file will be considered. Okay, so based on your requirements, you can create the resource files and place them in resources directory. So like that, there are many characteristics defined by SDK like MCC MNC. You can also define resource files based on screen orientation. Like if you want some specific things to happen when device is in portrait mode, then you can define as resource hyphen vertical.json. Then based on device type, for example, phone, tablet, wearables, like that. And also based on screen density, you can define the files. Screen density in the sense HDPI, XHDPI, MDPI. Based on the density, if you want to refer to different resources, then you can update them in this particular JSON files. Okay, so once this, for example, resource hyphen .json file is defined, you can access it in your JS or HML files using $R. So suppose I want to access the background attribute over here. So I'll be using $R of colors dot background. Okay. Okay. So coming to strings, I think already we have seen in the sample code. We can define different strings for different languages within i18n folder with a corresponding string name .json file like this. And this is for English and this is for Chinese. And you can access them similar way using $R, or for strings you can even use $T. So basically the file name should be language hyphen the script region .json file. Okay, let's move on. Okay, let's have a very brief introduction about the different components which are used in the UI page. So these are all the inbuilt components, and users can even define their custom components either using these inbuilt components or via drawing based on their own custom requirements. So whatever we are seeing in this slide are the inbuilt components. Okay, so there are SDK is providing these all types of components. The first one which you are seeing here are the container components. Container components are like layouts wherein these components can have inner components also. You can nest as many components as per your requirement within these components. Like whatever we have seen in the previous example, wherein we have used div. Like that, we can use list item and all. And coming to the next one, those are basic components like text, button and all. And along with this, we have some media type components to operate on camera, video, and we can even use canvas directly to draw on our canvas, and some grid related components and some SVG related components. You can just remember the basic things right now, and later in future sessions, we can brief more on each of these. So if you can see here, few examples. Like the text component mainly is used to display text like this. This is the syntax text. And if you are giving some CSS reference, you can put it in class equals to the ID and the text which you want to display. If you don't want to use CSS, you can directly define the styling here using style attribute to the text. Similar to that image component, wherein you will give the source, the image details which you need to display. The input components, there can be different types of inputs like text input, checkbox, button, etc. And as we discussed, there are some more container components which acts as layouts mainly. And each of the UI element can have some interactions by binding the events like on click, on touch, on focus. Okay, this is a brief introduction about components. Okay, so this is the basic introduction about the JS programming language. Before moving to CS, we can just have a glance about the sample applications. So I have already showed you the folder structure, right? So now we can just see about what this application does. Basically, this particular application has two components, text and button. And on to this button, even on-click event is attached, wherein on click of this event, launch function in the JS is called. The launch function does routing operation, wherein it will just open the next page. So here in the pages folder, you can right click, new, and create as many JS pages as you need using this operation. So like that, I have created one. Okay. Like that, I have created one JS page. And you can use system provided router API to traverse between the pages. Router.push will take you to the next page. To the next page in the sense, whatever is defined in the URI to that component, to that page, it will that page will be displayed to the user. Just one second. Okay, this we can try out later. Okay, this is one more JavaScript sample, wherein we have only one page. And this is a small functionality wherein you display some title using text component. And you have a swiper component wherein there are some some images are displayed and user can swipe on them to see all the images. and some description about the images which are displayed. And there is one button which user can click to add any of this to the cart. So it's just a simple page, and you can in the ID you have a previewer, so you can use it to see what exactly will be displayed. Yeah, if you can see here, this is what is displayed for this particular HTML file. As I said, title, swiper, description, and add to cart. And once add to cart is clicked, it goes to JS. Add cart function is called. So wherein in your JS file, if you see, some data is maintained, which is updated and used. So the image list, the text to be displayed, everything is defined here, and those are just used in your HTML and displayed in your UI. Okay, so over here, once add cart is clicked, the text is changed to, instead of add to cart, that will be changed to cart press 1. And that button style also will be changed. So that's a simple functionality. So these programs we will share, you guys can try out offline. Okay, let's move on to TypeScript basics. Okay, anyway, as we already discussed, the TypeScript-based declarative programming of Huawei's ArchUI is a simplified form, high-performance UI development framework, which is designed for cross-device applications. Like if you develop your UI for one particular device, this should be automatically adapted to your other devices, like between phone, wearables, TV, etc. Okay, so all this we already discussed. So directly let's jump into the directory structure of any ETS project. In HMOS, we call this particular programming as ETS, which stands for Extended TypeScript. And these files ends with, as you can see here, these files ends with .ets extension. And within this file, we actually describe all the UI layout styles, events, all the processing logic, everything will be defined in a single file. Okay, so if you explore more about this folder structure, it will be mostly similar to JS, but with few differences. Config.json is similar. And instead of JS, here the folder name will be ETS, followed by a default folder, which holds app.ets, which is the application level logics and lifecycle data will be maintained over here, followed by pages folder, which actually holds your ETS files, which each file indicates one page, and there is a common folder. Means any common data or resources or ETS files which can be referred by multiple pages can be maintained here. And coming to resources in an ETS application, all the resources will be stored in this resource folder with this folder structure. Base will be the default folder, and you can give some configurations, like for example, you can define like device type, like if you want some specific resources for your phone type, then you can create a folder called phone and maintain this structure within that folder. Then that particular folder will be referred only for your phone application, only for the application which is running in phone. But by default, this will be the folder structure. Within base element, you will maintain the JSON files. Each of these files we'll just explore later more. Graphics, layout, media, and any raw files which you want to use in your application, you can place in this particular folder. Okay, as we saw config.json file for JavaScript, here if you see, there will be a small change which we have to do for ETS project. In the same JS stack, along with name pages window, we have to define the mode over here. 1 minute. Okay, sorry. So name pages window are still same. Oh, the only difference is for the pages, you will give the ETS each page folder structure over here. And as I said, we have to add more details here. The mode actually configures the running type and syntax style of a JS component. So these have two attributes, which are type and syntax. This is the running type of the JS component. This can have two values, page ability and form. So basically page ability means the JS component actually runs in ability mode. And if you give it as form, then it means the JS component runs as a service widget. So for your full screen application, generally you use page ability. And if you want to develop some widgets, then you define as form over here. And coming to syntax attribute, this also can have two values, HML and ETS. So since you are intended to develop ETS projects, and then you will give ETS value over here. Otherwise, if you want to go for HML, CSS, JS style, then you have to give HML over here. So if you don't give this, the default will be HML syntax. And if you want to develop applications on ETS, then you have to define the mode over here. Okay, let's move on. Okay, let's explore more about the resources folder. As we already discussed, this is the resources folder structure. And as I said, that level 1 subdirectory, which is base is the default value. And here is where you can define different configurations based on your need. Like as we discussed for JavaScript also, there are different configurations which are supported, like MCC, MNC, device types, all of that. Based on your need, you can define the respective folder over here and use it. And anyway, in the level 2 folder, we already discussed, we have different JSON files, each having a different purpose. So suppose if you go to color.json, here is where you define all your color resources. String.json will have all your string resources. You can have plural.json also to hold your array resources. And float.json, here you define some resources such as spacing, rounded corners and all. And we have a media folder over here wherein you place your images. And similar to JS, here also we use $R to access the resources within your JS or within your ETS files, like this. Since these are defined within app, you have to use like this $R of app dot the file name, basically the type dot the value within this. So this is the syntax to access the resources. So these are for the elements. And if you want to access the media folder, app.media. The image name. And for the raw files, you have to use $raw file. Okay. And there will be some resources which are already defined by the framework. So those resources you can access using sys. For application, as we are using app. For system resources, you will be using sys. Sys. The element type dot element name. Okay, hope this part is clear. Let's move on. Okay, now let's spend some time to understand more about different basic concepts in TypeScript programming. Okay. So before going to the concepts, first have a glance on this sample code. This is one ETS file, and the basic ETS file will look like this. It have some, these are called decorators, and followed by a data structure called struct and the component name, followed by a build method wherein all your UI is actually defined. Your UI structure will be generally found within the build function. So this is the basic syntax of your ETS file. So looking at this syntax, let's derive some concepts. Okay, so the first basic concept is decorator, as I said, which applies to classes, structures, methods, variables. So in the sample app, entry, component, at state, these are all the decorators. More about decorators we'll learn further. The next is the custom component. Means anything which is defined using at component decorator will become a custom component. So in this particular sample, struct hello decorated by at component is a custom component. Okay. So as I said, UI description, the complete UI structure is built within the build method. And within the build method, if you see, some of the basic components are used, like text, buttons, divider. The basic components provided by framework are used. And one more observation is, for each of the component, the attributes are also set. For example, for text, font size is set in this way. So attributes can be set using functions, provided built-in functions. And one more observation is some events are defined. Like for this button, on click is event is attached to it using the function. So general syntax of ETS app will be similar to this. Okay. And for example, in the same example, if you see for a text, there will be some mandatory parameters which needs to be passed because a text cannot be empty. So in such cases, you have to pass the mandatory parameters, and there will be some functions which don't need mandatory parameters. Those can be empty, like divider. That's what is explained here. Like for example, image, also you need to pass mandatory parameter, like which image has to be displayed. And as we already discussed, these are the attributes which can be set to your component. And here in ETS, we will set in this syntax wherein you use functions. Okay, event configurations also we already discussed, on click, and callback can be either using lambda expressions or with normal functions. And this is one example where you are using your global function. So basically on click of this button, this is what will be executed. Okay, so this also already we discussed. Similar to JavaScript, this also will have some container components in the sense layout descriptions And within container components, you can use different other container components or other elements to describe your UI. So these are all the container components, which right now we just have a glance, and later we'll have more detailed sessions. Okay. And we quickly go through some of the decorators which are important in ETS, which we already saw at component. So basically a structure which is decorated by at component will become your custom component. So any custom component will have the following features: composability, reusability. This can be reused any number of times. And this also have a life cycle within your particular custom component. There will be some life cycle functions which are called and which can be used. And this all in all of these components, if user wish to update the UI based on some specific data, that can happen very easily, because in ETS the state management is designed very well. So as I said, this is the component life cycle. So whenever any component is initialized, these are the two lifecycle functions which will be called. So about to appear will be called before the build function, whenever the component initialization is completed. And whenever a component deinitialization happens, about to disappear will be called. So based on your requirement, you can make use of these lifecycle functions. So similar to at component, there are few more decorators like at entry. So any custom component decorated by at entry functions as the default entry component. It's like the main page. When any page is loaded, the component which is decorated by at entry will be displayed first. So that is the usage of at entry. So in this example, if you see, you have two components, but at entry is added to this particular my component. So when this page is loaded, my component will be displayed. And there is one more called at preview. I think while showing you JSample, I have showed you the previewer, right? So in ETS, whichever component is marked with at preview, only those can be seen in previewer. So when the page is loaded, custom components decorated by at preview are created and displayed. One more useful decorator called at extend, wherein you can use this to add new attribute functions to your inbuilt components. Like for example, text component, you want to add already text component, the SDK provides some attribute functions. If you want to add a new function, you can have at extend and define that function and use it. In this example, I have defined a fancy function using at extend, and I'm using it in my component. Okay, many times we were discussing about state management, right? I just give a very brief introduction about this in ETS. If you see this example, the count variable is annotated with at state decorator, which means whenever this particular variable is changed, the UI re-rendering happens. That's the main purpose of at state. So basically in declarative UI programming, basically whatever UI you are seeing, it's a function in the specific application state. So whenever you are updating the UI, which means you are modifying the current application state. So to have this easily useful, some attributes are, some decorators are defined and given for usage to the users. So let's see some of the state variable decorators. As I said, at state is a state attribute of the component. So basically, anytime at state decorated variable changes, the component re-rendering happens and updates the UI. Component re-rendering in the sense, the build method will be called again. In this particular example, when button is clicked, so toggle click is called, wherein count variable is incremented. Since it's a state variable, the build function will be called again and the UI updates. That's the functionality. So to have some relationship between parent and child components, two more decorators are there, which are called @link and @prop. So @link is nothing but this variable needs to be defined in your child component, and @link of child component will have some relationship with @state of parent component. So if one of these changes, both child and parent components will be re-rendered. Means the build method of both parent and child will be called. That's the usage of @link. And you might have some scenarios where only your child component has to refresh and not parent component. In such scenarios, you can use @prop. So these are the basic concepts related to state management using state variable decorators. We can have more samples in future sessions, but for now, you can have this basic introduction. Hope this decorators part is clear with all of you. Okay. I'll just show you one very basic ETS sample and its structure. Okay, as we have already seen in the PPT, so there will be an entry module, source main, and here ETS and resources folder in the top level, followed by config.json. Config.json will be similar to the JS file in the JS project with an extra mode, wherein the syntax is set to ETS. And then resources folder, as I shown in the PPT, similar structure. And ETS folder will have the application file, wherein application call lifecycle functions will be there, and the pages. In the pages, you can have your actual pages implemented. So here in this particular sample, food detail page is displayed. The UI of this will be like this, wherein we are just displaying one image, its text, and some details. So components and all we'll have in future sessions, just the structure part and the high-level syntax part you can observe over here. So as we have seen, the decorators are added. So when this page is loaded, this is the component which will be displayed since it is marked with @entry. And food detail is our custom component. And in the build method, we are defining our UI structure. This is the UI structure. Column is an element which we understand later. So and we are calling other components over here. So this is one component wherein image and text is displayed, which is this image and text. And this is the next component. If you see here in the build method, whatever is there in the build method, that is the UI structure for this particular component. So here, ingredient item is called 5 times. An ingredient item have text followed by 2 more text values. So 3 rows. So that details are hard coded here and printed. So this is just a simple app. Since I haven't marked any component with at preview, so nothing I will be able to visualize in my previewer. If we have to visualize the main component, so then I have to mark this with at preview. And then I'll be able to visualize it in previewer. Okay, so this will be the basic structure of an ETS file. Yeah. Okay, I'm done with the basics of ETS as well. And in the references, you can find some code labs which are publicized by us, which all of you can go through and try out. As of now, we have publicized for a sample application for JavaScript and with clear steps. So offline, all of you please go through this and try it out. Along with that, we have shared some sample codes of ETS. And along with that, I will show you the API documents which are provided by HarmonyOS SDK itself. So you can go to developer.harmonyos.com and you will have both guides and references available. Okay, so the direct JavaScript link for both of these I have pinged in the PPT. So you can directly open this and go through the basic concepts more in detail. So if you see here in Huawei Arc UI, you can find both JavaScript and TypeScript basic details. In the guides and in the API references, go to the JS API references, and here you can find actually all the APIs, components, which are all available in the SDK. You can have a look over here, and everything is clearly explained along with samples. So offline, you can have a look on these APIs as well. So for example, for JavaScript, all the components, all the events, container components, everything will be explained in detail. So you can refer to this references link for more details. And if you want to search for any particular component or particular API, you can use the search button and type over here. Okay, enter. So this will list, for example, I am just searching for a text component. So it will search the whole documentation and it will give you the suggestions. So you can go through and click on it directly. So directly it's giving to doc reference, API reference. Or if you want to understand in detail, you can go to guides and read the theoretical part. Okay, so this is one good documentation which you can refer offline. Okay, that's all from my side.